have any, we were sort of segueing maybe into like criticism. Do you find reviews or like comments or blogs or critiques or reviews constructive? But maybe I would open that up to more generally, like, because I know you write reviews sometimes.
Yeah.
Or you have written reviews and you have been reviewed.
Yeah.
So I'm curious as to what your take is on that.
I do read them. I know some people say they never read their reviews. I do read them. I don't go on Goodreads and read every comment because that's insane. That's just asking for heartbreak. But if something comes up in front of my face, I'll read it or look at it. And I do find it constructive, not so much like, oh, people are criticizing this aspect of my work and so I should change it, but more what are readers thinking? Like if a certain point comes up over and over again, it's just interesting to me to see, oh, this is something that comes up for a lot of people. And sometimes I'll still disagree with it, and then there will be a few readers that will disagree, and I'll think, oh, those are my people. It's too bad there are so few of them, but...
So you feel more like the people who are critical, you take note of it, but it's not going to change what you do. You're more of like, the people who get it, and those are my people.
Yeah, especially once the book's done, I can't change it anyway. But I am interested to know, especially when you're writing for kids or teenagers, it's a little bit like writing for another culture that I only am partly fluent in. And so it's interesting to me to see how do they react to something, maybe not the way I expected, or if I made a reference, did they get it or they didn't get it. So one of my books, The Boy on the Bridge, is set in the 80s in Soviet Union and during the Cold War. And that was hard because I was writing it for teenagers who hadn't been born yet. And so that is one thing I'm looking forward to if I do write for adults, is not having to explain past references and things like that and just expecting people to know what you're talking about. I think that would be refreshing. But somebody on Goodreads, I think it was like a young girl, criticized the book because she said, it says that this book takes place during the Cold War, but there was no sign of any war going on in the book at all. And she was really adamant about, like, this wasn't a war, and so obviously she didn't understand what a Cold War is. But it's interesting to me to know, okay, so that's a lot of my readership, and I have to keep that in mind. I'm not going to change the book. The book wouldn't exist, but if I worried about that, but...
It seems like something that's difficult in particular to YA fiction, but that's probably me just being narrow-minded, because it's probably true in all writing, but like, and maybe all art too, like the the cultural references that in particular seem to change much more frequently among the younger sort of teenage or middle grade demographic.
Yeah, and adults have a longer frame of reference. They have more years to look back on. And I guess you expect them to have learned some history or something that kids might not have had time to have learned yet. But you do have to, it's sort of a cliche about young adult fiction that a lot of times the adult writers, they're writing for teenagers, and so they try to fudge the pop culture references by having the character, I've done this myself, the character's really obsessed with old music or their parents' record collection, or because we want to use all those references that a real teenager might not actually use. But it's funny because like high school seems like something that would date. It's something that changes, the way school is set up changes, but the feelings that you have when you're in high school seem to be perennial. And so I don't know, like I try to think back to maybe in the 50s, I had older cousins who handed down books to me, and like the young adult books then, like Cherry Ames, Student Nurse and stuff. Things were so different then that I don't think it would translate now. But that's a really long time ago. Like the way people dated, everything was so much more formal. I always found them fascinating because of that. Like my older cousin gave me this book called Your Manners Are Showing, an etiquette guide for teenagers. And I read it as a child in the 1960s, 70s. And it was very 40s, 50s. And I was kind of waiting for, when am I going to grow up and wear white gloves and go on these formal dates and handwrite all these invitations? I still use it when someone invites me to their wedding, and I respond if it needs to be responded to, which happens less and less, formally, like, Miss Natalie Standiford. But, of course, it never came in handy. By the time I was a teenager, nobody even dated, really. Everybody was just friends. My mother was lamenting that. But I still was fascinated with it, and I used to watch the Mickey Mouse show, Mickey Mouse Club. They had the show Annette when she was 16. Annette Funicello moves to a new town and starts dating in this strange, formal way. It's so fascinating.
What else did you read when you were a kid, or what kind of kids' books were you into then? Or were you reading adult books?
I didn't read like what most people think of as young adult really ever. Like by 6th grade, I was pretty much reading adult books. And the kids, I didn't read like Stephen King, Jaws, stuff like that, because I'm too scaredy cat to read horror. But that kind of stuff was what kids read, which I think is still true. The Exorcist, a lot of things like that. But I read, Little Women and To Kill a Mockingbird, all the school books. Once and Future King, I loved. The Hobbit. Well, Watership Down came out, I think, when I was in middle school. So all those kinds of books. But I didn't really read YA, and it didn't exist at all the way it does now. But I loved younger children's books when I was littler, too. Like I still...
Like picture books?
Picture books and easy readers. I always think that I can read form is a neglected... It's an art form that people don't realize what a beautiful art form it at least used to be. Those books like Little Bear and Frog and Toad Are Friends. They're like poetry. Or read Dr. Seuss. I love those books. When I first started writing that for children, that was the kind of book I tried to write.
Since you began writing for children sort of before there was, this YA market, what texts did you sort of learn from, or were there any texts that you were like, if I can learn to write like this, then I will have made it, in the sense of that, if you get an MFA in young people's literature now, or even in adult literature, your job as a writer is to really just read and study text. So were there any texts that you were like studying to figure out to try to write what you wanted to write?
Well, I was very lucky because I was an editorial assistant at Random House, and part of the job of the editorial assistants was to write the licensed character books, like the coloring books and the Star Wars books and all that stuff, as part of our job. And there were a lot of us, and the department was expanding, and there was a veteran editor named Jenny Finelli who took it upon herself to have a workshop for the young editors and editorial assistants where she would assign us classic children's book texts, and we would talk about what made them work. And I remember she told us a story about The Outsiders by S.E. Hinton, which I hadn't read. I don't know if I've even still read it, but anyway. She was a teenager when she wrote it, and she submitted it to Random House, and according to this editor, an editorial assistant read it, and she was kind of a snooty college girl, and this was about these Oklahoma kids who didn't use good grammar, and she rejected it, saying it wasn't literary enough. And Jenny told us, don't be like that girl. Keep your mind open. What's literary is a very broad thing. So she would tell us stories like that, and we read Margaret Wise Brown. I remember we read Daniel Pinkwater. We read, Frog and Toad Are Friends, and Arnold Lobel. At that time, young adult was considered dead, basically, so we didn't read anything of that. It was just picture books, easy readers, and maybe young middle grade novels.